going to talk about culture and teaching culture. I know you may be thinking, wait, this is a language class. We're supposed to learn to teach a specific language, especially a second language. But I would argue that you really cannot effectively do that without addressing culture. And hopefully from the lessons we've had so far, you would agree with that. So why teach culture? Culture and languages are inseparable. They work together to create meaning. Students are going to need cultural context so that they can communicate. Teaching culture also builds empathy, global awareness, and communicative competence, which we've talked about. I believe that we should be addressing social studies, which is really also addressing culture in every content area, no matter what we teach. We want to create authentic learning experiences that go beyond just learning the grammar and the vocabulary. So the 3 P's of culture are perspective, practice, and product. Perspective involves the beliefs, the attitudes, the values, and the worldviews that shape how people see the world. Their practices are their social behaviors, their customs, their traditions, the way in which they interact. Products, then, are their stories, their art, their movies, their music, their food, their literature, their tangible creations that can show us about their practices and their perspectives. We can look at a story from our culture, a story from another culture, and compare and contrast the morals and learn a whole lot about ourselves and about each other. These are just a few examples of some cultural stories that are helpful to use in the classroom. Lon Popo is one of my favorites. It's a Chinese folktale about family and cleverness, but it has a wolf in it, and it's very similar to Little Red Riding Hood. I also love La Llorona because it really makes sense to me, the purposes behind teaching that. So a lot of times these cultural stories will teach a lesson or offer us some type of warning. It's important that as we're teaching culture that we're using authentic materials, stories, songs, videos, real-world resources that come straight from that culture, that we also compare. We compare like their greetings, their customs, their practices across cultures so that we can make connections and make meaning. We want to offer students opportunities for role play, visuals, hands-on cultural artifacts. We want to be very interactive in our teaching. And then lastly, we want to connect to a language goal, some type of vocabulary or grammar objective. We want to be very careful to avoid stereotypes. We present multiple perspectives. We do not generalize. Of course, we would never say all people do XYZ in this particular place. We use authentic, diverse sources. We encourage critical thinking. The ACTFL, American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, sets national standards and guidelines. And so when we look at the 3 Ps, they come from this. So I wanted to make sure we address the ACTFL. And if you have extra time and your free time, you can look them up and you can find all sorts of professional development opportunities and resources for teaching other languages and other culture. So practical tips for you in your classroom. If you are an education major, you're going to be a teacher, and you're also going to be teaching students that speak different languages. You're going to want to integrate culture in every lesson, not just occasional activities. So not just, culture fairs, culture fests. Those are good, but we want to integrate culture into everything that we do. We also want to connect to our learning objectives. We're not stopping the teaching of the standards. We have to continue teaching those. We just link the cultural teaching in with those standards. So specifically in this case with vocabulary, grammar. And we want to create, again, safe spaces. We talked about that last week. We want to be respectful of cultural differences and foster conversation and discussion. We don't shy away from it because we're afraid something controversial will come out. but we use those opportunities to teach how to be respectful, how to disagree respectfully. And we ourselves as teachers need to be reflecting on our own assumptions. We all have cultural biases, and we all have these perspectives that we bring that we need to be very aware of when we're coming in, and especially when we're teaching about somebody else's culture that's not our own. Just some key takeaways. Culture gives language a meaning. The 3 Ps can help us plan lessons. Authentic stories help students connect emotionally. And then we looked at the ACTFL standards. Your assignment this week is going to be to create a lesson where you're going to tie in a cultural narrative. And I'll let you read about that so that you can see all that it's going to entail. But it's your first assignment that you would actually be able to create something that you may be using in the classroom. So it's really exciting. I want to show you an example of something that I created, just so that whenever you start working on that assignment, you don't feel overwhelmed. You see exactly what you are expected to do. So one of the first things I would do before even teaching this lesson to the whole class, if I have students who are at the beginning level, remember we talked about proficiency levels last week. If I have beginning students, I would pull them aside and just give them a quick introduction to some key vocabulary. And you can see this worksheet here that I created that has the specific key vocabulary for this story. So I would think that through. I would introduce those students. Maybe we call it like a 5-minute flyby. It doesn't have to be a long lesson, just some way so that they're making connections to what is a pitcher, what is a pebble, what is water. And some of these they may have more background information on than others. So when it was time to introduce the story, I would definitely show them a picture. And let's go ahead and read this story together in case you're not familiar with the crow and the pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher until at last it was near enough so he could drink. Reading this story, whoops, there, I clicked that. You can see he's dropping the pebble in. As I was reading this story, like when I mentioned words like higher, I would definitely be putting my hand in the air to show them a visual representation of what higher is. Or when I said picking up some small pebbles, I would probably take my hand and pretend to pick something up. This is going to help those students. And I would only do this if I had beginner students in my classroom. Maybe intermediate, depending on the grade level. So if I were teaching this story, what I would do next would really depend on the age of the student that I'm teaching and the content. So the first thing I want to address is you can use these short children's stories. This one is an Aesop's fable. You can use these with any age student, and even older students love them. Second of all, I want to point out that we do still have to teach the content. So for you, you're taking 4 classes and you're adding this certification, which is phenomenal. You may have the wonderful opportunity to simply teach language. And if that's you, then the blessing of that, the benefit is you get to really hone in on teaching that second language, teaching the vocabulary, the grammar, all the components of it. But for many of you, you may be teaching in a classroom where you have variety of proficiency levels and you're teaching content as well. You don't get to say, well, I'm a math teacher, so I don't have to teach them how to speak English. You do have to teach both the language and the content. So here's an example of what I would do if let's say I was teaching science and I was teaching lower grade science. I might show them, here's this video. I'm going to hit play here. You can watch it for just a second. And there's no sound in the video. We're just kind of watching what the scientist is doing. But I would show my students and we would discuss it. At this point, I would probably pause it and ask them to turn and talk to a partner so they have some chance to speak about what do they think is going to happen. Now, if we've just read the story, some of them are already getting an idea of what the bird is about to do. And there he is putting the rock in the water. But he still can't quite get it. And so after we watch this video, I would likely address the word displacement for water, give them some cups of water, give them some rocks, and let them experience on their own what water displacement can look like. And we would talk about the science behind it. That'd be if I'm teaching lower grades. A worksheet that I might give them could look something like this. And here it is differentiated for the different levels. So a beginner might get this, new word displacement. And here's a picture of it. And I ask them to write the new word below and then match the words with the pictures, the vocabulary from the story. If I have intermediate students, again, new word displacement, I might ask them to write a sentence using the word displacement and then give them a little bit of a starter. I can demonstrate water displacement by, and then here they can see putting a rock in water, or, they could say it a variety of different ways. And then here they're going to retell the story that we just read, but I've given them some sentence frames to help them. And of course, an advanced student, we don't want to over scaffold. We want them to be thinking. And so here's an advanced student might have write the word displacement in a sentence, and then they may write a short paragraph comparing the story's theme to real world example. So these are just some ways that I could tie in science if I was teaching science. The one thing that I didn't mention yet that would be very, very important is before we get to this, as we're reading our story, we stop and talk about what is the meaning? What can we learn from this? Students would have a chance to share. Some of them, like in this case, it says, in a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. Now, a student would never say it that way, but they can talk about creative problem solving. We want to talk about the moral or the lesson of the story and what it can actually teach us. And then I can connect this back to, other cultures have stories, similar stories to teach lessons. And I can ask them, what from your culture, do you know of any stories where we're learning about how using creativity to problem solve can be helpful? If I were teaching older students, they're probably very familiar with water displacement. But here's an idea of something I could begin my lesson with this story. And then we can move on and do this gizmos, which this particular gizmos, the setup is students take on the role of a hydrologist to investigate why the hydrologic cycle's rate has increased and what can be done to manage flooding. This gives you an idea of how I could connect this fable into something that they're actually studying in their science class. And this is even at an advanced level. So just to kind of review back here, when you're creating your lesson, you're going to think of some kind of story that teaches a lesson, and you don't have to go in and connect it to content area. You can actually just specifically be teaching language using your story, but you are going to come up with some kind of activity for students to do, and you're going to want to think through how can you modify that assignment so that it meets the needs of a variety of different types of language learners. Because again, you may have a variety of language learners in your classroom. So again, read the instructions very carefully because they're going to help guide you through this process.